An unexpected storm ripped through the set of Piers Morgan Uncensored, turning what was supposed to be a routine political interview into one of the most explosive, history-making moments ever broadcast live. The tension wasn't gradual, it was instant. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think really caused Karoline Leavitt to completely lose it on live television. The camera panned across the glossy studio lights, catching the sharp gleam in Karoline Leavitt's eyes as she sat across from Morgan. She looked calm, unshaken, and terrifyingly composed, the kind of calm that warned of an oncoming eruption. You could feel it before anyone spoke, that quiet electric prelude to chaos that every viewer recognizes instinctively. And deep down, everyone watching knew something massive was about to detonate. Before the sparks began to fly, the stage was deceptively ordinary. The desk gleamed beneath the lights, the audience leaned forward in curiosity, and Morgan sat poised with that self-assured smirk that had carried him through countless interviews. His tone, his posture, his every movement oozed confidence, the kind of confidence that comes from years of calling out politicians and walking away unscathed. But this time, the energy in the air told a different story. This wasn't going to be another verbal joust or clever exchange. This was going to be a reckoning. And before we dive into this firestorm that the media tried to contain, let's pause for just a moment. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because this is the kind of live television clash that networks try to bury, but we're dragging it right back into the spotlight. Trust me, this isn't just an interview. This is a collision of pride, law, and live broadcast chaos that the world will never forget. Morgan leaned back in his chair, settling into his comfort zone like a king preparing for an easy conquest. His smirk widened as he adjusted his tie, the picture of smug composure. His voice rolled out smooth and cutting, dripping with that polished British cadence he'd mastered to perfection. "Miss Leavitt," he began, the words laced with condescension, "surely even you must admit your recent appearances in politics have been more about personal branding than actually serving the American people." The tone was that of a man convinced he'd already won the argument. But what came next shattered that illusion instantly. Without a word, Karoline reached into a sleek leather folder that sat beside her, her movements unhurried, almost graceful. She pulled out a crisp document, a legal one, and placed it squarely on the desk between them. The sound of the paper hitting the wood echoed louder than any shout. The camera zoomed in, catching the unmistakable header: United States District Court, Southern District of New York. Her voice, calm and sharp, sliced through the silence. "I'm here to serve you with something else entirely." The room froze. You could feel the shock ripple through every technician behind the glass, and then, like a thunderclap, she delivered it. "You've just been served with a $20 million defamation lawsuit, live on your own show." For 5 long seconds, time itself seemed to stop. The silence was so heavy it could have crushed concrete. Piers Morgan's confident smirk collapsed in real time. His face twitched through confusion, disbelief, and then dawning panic. The man who had built a career out of making others uncomfortable suddenly found himself stripped of every ounce of control. In less than 48 hours, that single moment exploded across the internet. The clip, Morgan's frozen expression, his lips parted mid-word, was replayed millions of times across social media. Viewers from every corner of the globe watched in awe as the unthinkable unfolded. For years, Morgan had thrived on controversy. He had mocked presidents, provoked celebrities, and cornered countless guests with brutal precision. But this time, the predator had been cornered live on his own stage by a woman who refused to be his next headline. For months, Morgan had zeroed in on Karoline Leavitt, attacking her with relentless zeal. He mocked her credentials, ridiculed her background, and twisted her statements into sound bites that kept his show trending. It was entertainment to him, calculated chaos that drew in viewers. But what he didn't realize was that Karoline was not just another political figure. She was a trained attorney, sharp as glass and dangerous when underestimated. She knew exactly where the line between free speech and defamation stood, and she had been quietly preparing for this moment. 3 weeks before that explosive night, Morgan had aired a segment titled "The Karoline Leavitt Problem." In it, he accused her of fabricating parts of her academic record, hinted that she was under ethics investigation, and suggested she'd hidden financial conflicts. Every word was false. Karoline had the documents, the evidence, and the receipts to prove it. She'd tried to ignore it until she realized silence was only feeding the lie. So when the show began that evening, she wasn't there to defend herself. She was there to deliver justice. Morgan opened the conversation with that same dismissive charm that made him famous. "Ms. Leavitt, your recent political performances have been described as theatrical grandstanding," he said, eyes gleaming with superiority. But Karoline didn't flinch. Her response was calm, poised, and layered with quiet confidence. "Piers, when you stand up to power, people call it performance. But standing up is exactly why I was sent to Washington, to speak truth and hold people accountable." The tone was graceful, yet unyielding. Morgan leaned forward, his smirk returning. "Surely some of your tactics are questionable. That confrontation with Justice Alloway, for example." Karoline cut in smoothly, her words as sharp as the click of a gavel. "Legal scholars praised that exchange, Piers. My preparation was airtight. You might not like my delivery, but every fact I presented was correct." Her steady composure began to throw him off balance. Morgan was used to guests scrambling under pressure, but Karoline didn't just hold her ground, she made it look effortless. Irritated, he tried another angle. "You're 34, he said, leaning closer. "Barely 2 years into politics, yet you speak as if you're a seasoned policy veteran. Isn't that a bit presumptuous?" Karoline's reply was devastatingly precise. "My record speaks for itself. I'm a licensed attorney in civil rights law, a Harvard graduate with a JD from NYU, and over a decade of courtroom experience in federal cases." Her eyes never left his. "And you, Piers? What legal training do you bring to this conversation?" The studio audience shifted. Even Morgan's expression flickered. "I'm a journalist, Miss Leavitt. I ask the questions." But Karoline smiled, just barely, and murmured, "Just clarifying who's doing the interrogating here." It wasn't just a comeback, it was a statement of dominance, and the power dynamic flipped in an instant. Morgan straightened, his tone hardening as he opened a folder. "Questions have been raised about your financial disclosures, your ties to lobbyists and transparency issues," he said. Karoline's jaw tightened slightly. "Go ahead, Piers, be specific. I have nothing to hide." His next words dropped like stones. "Reports say your academic records are under review, that you're facing an ethics inquiry, and that you failed to disclose financial conflicts." The air in the studio thickened. Those accusations were not just lies, they were weapons. And Karoline knew it. Her voice dropped an octave, turning cold and deliberate. "Piers, you need to be very careful right now. Are you stating on air that my degree is under review, that I'm under investigation, and that I've hidden financial ties?" Sensing drama, Morgan pushed harder, mistaking her warning for weakness. "These are concerns from credible sources," he said smugly. "The public deserves the truth." Karoline's eyes narrowed. Her tone was icy and surgical. "And these so-called credible sources, Piers, who exactly are they?" He waved his hand as if swatting away a fly. "I'm not revealing my sources," he said, the smirk twitching back into place. That was his mistake. Karoline leaned forward, every word precise. "You've just made several specific false statements about me on live television. My law degree has never been questioned. I'm not under investigation, and I have no undisclosed financial conflicts." She paused, locking eyes with him. "More importantly, I believe, you knew those statements were false." The studio temperature seemed to drop. Even the producers watching behind the glass stopped moving. Karoline continued, her tone cutting with calm ferocity. 3 weeks ago, your production team contacted my office. My staff sent documented proof that every one of these claims was baseless, and yet, here you are, repeating them again." For the first time, Morgan faltered. His confidence wavered. "Ms. Leavitt, I stand by my reporting," he muttered defensively. Karoline's reply hit like a hammer. "Reporting? You haven't reported anything, Piers. You've echoed lies without checking a single fact. You've ignored evidence, and now you're doubling down on garbage you know isn't true." Morgan tried to interrupt. "Now hold on just a minute." But Karoline's voice sliced through him, firm and measured. "No, you hold on, Piers. For months you've made false statements about me, questioning my qualifications, my integrity, my honesty, without a shred of proof." Then, in a moment that shifted everything, Karoline reached into her briefcase once more. Every camera turned. The sound crew froze. "You want to talk about accountability?" she said quietly, pulling out a thick folder. "Let's talk about yours." Morgan blinked, visibly rattled. "Ms. Leavitt, I think you're being overly sensitive. This is legitimate journalism," he said, but the cracks in his composure were showing. Karoline didn't blink. Legitimate journalism means facts, Piers. It means checking your sources. It means allowing people to respond. And when you get it wrong, it means correcting the record. She opened the folder with precision. "I've got the receipts, transcripts, emails, every false statement you've made, every moment your team ignored the truth." The control room was chaos. Producers whispered frantically, signaling to cut the segment, but the cameras stayed live. Karoline pressed on, her tone calm but deadly. "And more than that," she continued, "I have evidence showing you made these statements with actual malice, meaning you knew they were false or you simply didn't care." Morgan shifted, his tone rising in protest. "Ms. Leavitt, I understand you're upset, but threatening legal action on air is not appropriate." Karoline leaned forward. Her voice dropped into a chilling calm. "I'm not threatening anything, Piers." She reached into her briefcase one last time and placed another document in front of him. "I'm taking action." Karoline's movements were deliberate, precise, and confident, the kind that make an entire room lean forward. Every camera followed her hand as she slid the document across the glossy desk. Her tone sharpened, her authority absolute. "Piers Morgan and Talk TV," she declared, her voice ringing through the studio. "You are hereby served with a complaint filed in the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York." The air seemed to vanish. Morgan's smirk dissolved completely. His face, usually animated and expressive, locked into stunned disbelief as though the world had just tilted on its axis. The director behind the glass mouthed something no one could hear. Camera operators exchanged quick, horrified glances. Nobody knew whether to cut to commercial or let the chaos unfold. But Karoline wasn't done, not even close. Her voice remained steady, controlled, and terrifyingly composed. "You've made false statements about my professional qualifications, my ethics, and my fitness for public service," she continued, reading directly from the document as the camera zoomed in on every word. "This lawsuit seeks $20 million in damages, plus punitive penalties and a court-ordered injunction requiring you to issue public retractions." Morgan's mouth opened, but no words came out. His eyes darted toward the control booth, silently pleading for someone to step in, someone to save him from the live disaster unraveling before millions. But nobody moved. For the first time in his career, the master of control had lost control completely. Finally, he managed to stammer, This can't be real. You can't just..." But Karoline interrupted him with chilling calm. "Oh, it's very real, Piers," she said, her tone surgical. "And serving you live on air is poetic justice, because this is where you chose to defame me." The audience didn't move. No one dared breathe. It felt like a courtroom disguised as a studio, and Karoline Leavitt was now both prosecutor and judge. She opened the complaint and began to read it aloud. Her voice echoed through the studio like a legal verdict. The complaint alleges defamation per se, false light, invasion of privacy, and intentional interference with business relations. Each term landed like a blow. Piers shifted uncomfortably in his seat, gripping the arms of his chair until his knuckles turned pale. He looked around, searching for an escape, but there was none. The lights were still rolling. The cameras were still on. The world was still watching. Karoline's composure was unshakable. "We are seeking compensatory and punitive damages," she continued, "and a permanent injunction requiring you to correct every false statement across your platforms, social media, website, and syndicated channels." Morgan blinked rapidly, trying to gather himself. 20 million? That's absurd, he snapped. Karoline didn't flinch. Given your global reach and the damage you've caused, it's more than fair. And the evidence, she said, flipping through pages, is overwhelming. She began outlining the timeline with methodical precision. On October 12th, your producer emailed my office about my academic background. My staff responded immediately with my Harvard degree, my NYU law credentials, and my bar admission documents. On October 20th, your team asked whether I was under investigation. My chief of staff confirmed on record that I was not. On November 1st, you requested information about my financial disclosures, and we sent you direct links to my public filings. You ignored all of it. Morgan shifted again, his voice breaking slightly. We get a lot of emails, he mumbled. Karoline's eyes flashed. That's not an excuse, Piers. That's negligence. You didn't just get it wrong. You deliberately ignored the truth because it didn't fit the narrative you wanted to sell. He swallowed hard, his confidence fading fast. Surely we can handle this off camera, he said weakly, the edge gone from his tone. Karoline leaned in, her voice cutting through his words like a scalpel. Oh no, Piers. You humiliated me publicly, and you'll face accountability publicly. You chose to attack my reputation in front of millions. Now, millions will see what accountability looks like. Her words reverberated through the studio like thunder. Morgan's show had built its empire on confrontation, but this wasn't entertainment. It was exposure. And Karoline was systematically dismantling his entire defense, live and unscripted. She turned another page, her expression controlled, her posture regal. Since your false broadcasts, I've received thousands of threats, she continued. My family has been harassed. My staff has been intimidated. My home address was leaked online. All of it, every single piece, traces back to the lies you aired. Morgan's face drained of color. The swagger that defined him, that smirking self-assurance, was gone. He looked smaller now, deflated under the weight of consequences he'd never imagined facing in real time. This is unprecedented, he muttered quietly. You can't just sue a journalist for doing his job. Karoline's eyes narrowed with laser precision. That's exactly the point, she said firmly. You weren't doing journalism. You were manufacturing drama. You turned lies into headlines and headlines into ratings. That's not reporting. That's reckless slander. And there are laws against it. Her tone deepened, growing more powerful with each sentence. She turned another page, her hand steady. If we win, and we will, you will be required by court order to issue full retractions on every platform where these lies were spread. Every social post, every website link, every syndication feed. You will correct the record or face contempt of court. The conviction in her voice left no room for doubt. Morgan tried to recover some ground. This is clearly a publicity stunt, he said, forcing out a laugh that died before it finished. Karoline's reply was devastating. A publicity stunt, she repeated, her tone icy. I'm a public servant, not a showman. I don't need stunts. What I need is accountability. And you're about to learn what that looks like. Her words landed with the weight of a closing argument. The audience could feel it, the shift in power, the collapse of Morgan's empire of arrogance. For too long, she continued, television hosts have hidden behind the shield of journalism while poisoning reputations with lies. You've made a game of destroying people's names for clicks. But guess what, Piers? The game is over. The air grew heavier. You could hear the faint hum of the studio lights, the rustle of a paper from the producer's booth. Karoline's voice didn't waver. You want to critique my policies? Go ahead. That's part of democracy. But the moment you lie about my credentials, my ethics, or my integrity, that's defamation. And defamation, she leaned in, eyes narrowing, has consequences. You're going to pay for this. Every eye in the room was locked on them. Even the camera operators, trained to remain invisible, couldn't hide their astonishment. Morgan stared at her, stunned into silence. You can't, he began, but she cut him off with chilling finality. Oh, I can, and I just did. Then came the final blow. Karoline's tone softened, but only slightly, the kind of calm that comes right before the gavel hits. The process server is waiting right outside your studio, she said evenly, but since we're live, service is now complete. The camera zoomed in as she slid the final document across the table. "You've been officially served, Mr. Morgan." The weight of those words hit harder than any insult or confrontation he'd ever faced. Morgan sat frozen, staring at the papers like they were a death sentence. The silence stretched, long and merciless. Karoline began gathering her documents with deliberate calm. Every gesture was graceful, precise, the quiet movements of someone who had already won. "Your legal team will want to review that complaint line by line," she said, rising to her feet. "Discovery begins in 30 days. She turned toward the exit, her heels clicking softly on the studio floor. Just before stepping out, she stopped and looked back over her shoulder. The look in her eyes was unshakable. "Next time you try to destroy someone's name, make sure your facts are straight first," she said, "because in this country, we have laws. And you," she paused, voice tightening, "are about to learn them the hard way." The door closed behind her, and for a moment, the studio was dead silent. Morgan didn't move. He sat there staring at the desk, the smirk long gone, replaced by an expression of disbelief and quiet dread. 10 seconds of total stillness passed before he finally muttered, "We'll be right back after the break." But the damage was already done. Within minutes, the clip went viral. Millions watched the moment Karoline Leavitt dismantled Piers Morgan live on air and served him a lawsuit on his own show. Social media erupted. Hashtags exploded. Across every platform. The story trended worldwide within hours, a perfect storm of shock, satisfaction, and justice. Major outlets replayed the footage endlessly. Legal analysts dissected every second. Memes flooded the internet. A Harvard law professor even posted, "This is how you handle defamation in the digital age: preparation, precision, and public accountability." Across the Atlantic, the British press went wild. The Guardian called it a rare and devastating reversal. The Times of London labeled it a case study in media implosion. For once, even Piers Morgan's homeland turned on him. The fallout came fast. Advertisers quietly suspended deals. Ratings plummeted overnight. Within 24 hours, Talk TV shares dropped 14%. Behind the scenes, executives held emergency meetings, desperate to contain the disaster. But there was no containing it. The story had taken on a life of its own. Inside the network, panic spread like wildfire. Boardroom lights burned late into the night. Lawyers scrambled. Producers whispered about resignations. For the first time in years, Piers Morgan wasn't the man asking the questions. He was the headline. And it wasn't flattering. 3 months later, the drama that began under the bright lights of Piers Morgan Uncensored had transformed into a full-scale legal and cultural storm. The courtroom was packed with cameras, analysts, and journalists from around the world, all eager to witness the fallout from what had started as a simple interview. Piers Morgan's legal team filed to dismiss the case, claiming his statements were opinions protected by free speech. But Karoline's attorneys came armed with something more potent than rhetoric: evidence. They submitted a blistering rebuttal complete with leaked audio recordings straight from Morgan's own production meetings. In one clip, Morgan's voice could be heard saying, "Yeah, that claim probably isn't true, but it'll make good TV." The room gasped when it was played aloud. It wasn't just a mistake, it was intent. Worse still, emails surfaced showing that network executives had known some of the claims against Karoline were false, but decided to air them anyway, for dramatic effect. The courtroom fell silent. The judge's expression said it all. The case had just shifted from speculation to certainty. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Talk TV's reputation crumbled. Sponsors pulled out one by one. The network's parent company held crisis meetings to contain the bleeding, but it was too late. Public trust had evaporated, and every headline screamed the same truth. Piers Morgan wasn't the man holding others accountable anymore. He was the one being held accountable himself. Karoline, meanwhile, didn't gloat. She didn't host victory interviews or appear on morning shows to celebrate. Instead, she focused on her work, letting the legal system do what it was meant to do: expose the truth. Her restraint only amplified her strength. She became a symbol of what it looked like when composure met courage, when intelligence outlasted arrogance, and when truth finally cornered sensationalism. 6 months later, Piers Morgan Uncensored, was gone. The network quietly settled the lawsuit for an undisclosed amount, issued a full public apology, and posted written retractions across all digital platforms. Morgan's credibility was shattered. His once commanding voice in media had been reduced to a cautionary echo. The man who thrived on confrontation had been undone by one, and it was the kind he never saw coming. Karoline Leavitt, on the other hand, emerged stronger than ever. Her case became required reading in law schools across the country, cited in lectures on journalism ethics and defamation law. Professors analyzed every frame of that broadcast, calling it a turning point in the relationship between truth and television. Students studied her composure, her strategy, and her refusal to be intimidated. The public began to view her as something far greater than a political figure. She became a standard-bearer for accountability in an era where sensationalism had often replaced substance. She showed that being calm wasn't weakness, that patience could be more powerful than rage, and that sometimes justice doesn't come in a courtroom, it comes live in front of millions. In the end, the story wasn't just about a lawsuit, it was about a shift, a cultural reckoning. The day Karoline Leavitt served Piers Morgan on live television became a symbol of what happens when truth finally stands up to noise. It was a moment that reminded everyone watching that fame and arrogance crumble easily, but facts and integrity never do. The broadcast that began as an ambush ended as a masterclass in poise and power. And as the final credits rolled months later on what used to be Morgan's show, one message echoed louder than any outro, any headline, or any tweet. Careless journalism has consequences, and sometimes the truth doesn't whisper. It walks right into the room, looks you in the eye, and serves you justice.